Jeffrey Epstein, The Anatomy of a Monster. So, in this video, I'm going to dive into his astrology, look at some of the psychology, some of what I know about how a monster like this is formed, and how such a person not just got away with it, I mean, literally was the captain of an entire segment of society, and that looks like it's completely going to get away with it. Before I dive into it, let's talk about why this is something that is completely gotten away with. I mean, this is something that people are having a hard time understanding. How is this gotten away with? Now, I understand it because I've seen it my whole life. I've understood it my whole life because people believe these people, okay? There is a tilting of let's err on the side of kindness towards somebody who has been accused of something monstrous. Okay. That's how society is structured. Certainly there's a, historical element of fear because a lot of times these were powerful men or maybe even murderous men or very popular men or men, just who are at the peak in some way. And almost always their victims are somebody who's too small, too weak, too meaningless, whether they're poor or they're just children. They can't say anything. They have no power. They have no influence against such a monstrously huge influence. Okay. So this is just the way society is tilted and has been. This isn't new. And so for people to be shocked, it's a internal code that they have among this collection of people who are engaged in these behaviors together. They have this feeling that they're superior and they're better than everyone. This is a lot to do with the way boys and girls are trained growing up. Maybe that's changing. I don't know really. But there's definitely something to that and certainly people with privilege, people who are raised with indulgence, given everything, especially the most violent members of society, okay, who are usually men. Now, there are certainly psychotic women, and I will do another video on the despicable Ghislaine Maxwell. I'll do the despicable Ghislaine. I'll do her chart as well. But so make sure you subscribe because I'll be doing a few more of these because, we want to understand who are these monsters and how do we spot them? How do we avoid them in the future? So the thing is, we'll look at some of the astrological chart patterns. I did post a private video, not private, but like a self-hosted video on my website about how to spot a PDF file using astrology. I will add a tutorial. I'm going to put that all in my resources tab on my website so that it's there always. It's easy to find. So I will make sure you go to the blog auraright.media and subscribe to the site so you get notified when I post this tutorial. So you can actually look at people's chart and you can identify certain astrological fingerprints that make somebody more likely to engage in these kinds of behaviors but one of the first key things to understand that has absolutely little to do with astrology that you can just really see on somebody, this would be somebody who is spoiled, somebody who is entitled, somebody who thinks everything is theirs, someone who has that sort of attitude where they walk into a place and just sort of expect, okay? That's like a key hallmark of a narcissist, psychopath, sociopath, there's really no doubt that when we're looking at the Epstein, who is a stain on humanity, these Epstein events and things he's done, there is no doubt that this is an absolute complete psychopath. Okay. Was he born? Was he made? I actually have a video on P. Diddy I did called Born That Way. I will upload that again because it should go in this series of understanding some of the darkest forces in humanity. All right, so let me pull up the chart and I'll go through some of that. But I actually didn't do a lot of research on his early childhood, but I'll tell you what the chart tells me about his early childhood because it does tell me some things. Psychologists would want to know about that because that's how we understand how people get patterned and their behaviors, expand into their life, right? So let's take a look at his chart. So he was born on January 20th, 1953 at 6:15 a.m. We don't always get famous people's birth dates, but in this case, it is reasonably safe to assume that we got the right birth date. I mean, that's my intuition, is that we did get the right time of birth. So he has Capricorn rising, which, we can just start with Capricorn, with the rising, because the rising is the mask. It's how people see you on the sort of external public level. It's your persona. So with Capricorn rising, he looks formal. Sometimes Capricorn rising people can be a little stiff, but they look formal. They tend to look best in formal looking kinds of clothes. They just look authoritative. They look respectable. They have all of this sort of, having the hallmarks and the indicators that society deems as high quality, usually with Saturn ruling the ascendant, because Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. So that means that Saturn indicates how the mask of this being was seen, right? The persona that he projected. There's also Chiron on the ascendant, which I will get to in a minute because that's really significant. But let's just talk about for a second that Saturn ruling the ascendant. Saturn up in the 9th house, very close to the midheaven. Is it not quite conjunct, right? A little wide for me to count. Still, it is in the 9th house. Saturn up there in the 9th house, which can indicate someone, and it's also conjunct Neptune, which we're about to have another Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is interesting because that is showing us, Epstein being revealed, all the things he kept secret that were part of his whole life cycle with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, not very close, but close enough, is now coming to the surface as we have this universal worldwide Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So this is interesting that this is the timing of the cycle of all of his misdeeds, the things he kept in the dark, the secrets he kept, which is Neptune, right? Neptune can be things that are kept in the dark. And then Saturn being, of course, connected to the government, connected to authority, connected to systems, connected to the rules. So his rules of life, the way he lived, the rules by which he lived were very much in secret, even though in the 9th house, there was a lot of foreign dealings. We know that there's been there's a lot of evidence in the files showing that he had alliances and associations with Mossad, with Israel. I can't say Mossad because I don't have any evidence of that, but that's the implication. Okay. And of course we have statements from people in the government saying that he was untouchable because he was an asset. So he was allowed to get away with a lot and it was secret and it was hidden and it was connected to authority, which is Saturn, right? And of course, Saturn ruling his ascendant. So he was able to present a mask of authority. He was able to look like an authority. He worked in colleges. He had no real credentials for doing so. He was a financial advisor to all kinds of people. He had complete and total financial control over Les Wexner's estate. He could do anything he wanted with like Victoria's Secret, the whole brand, and with all of the money. This was, all sort of like he was looked at like he was official and he was authoritative and he was respectable and he had all the markers that like banks like and things of this nature, even though he was secretly completely someone and something entirely different than what he presented with the facade, with the mask. Now, the 3 cornerstones of the personality are the sun, the moon, and the ascendant, right? We just went through the ascendant, but the relationship between the ascendant and the sun is a indication of how much someone actually appears like who they really are. So, and that doesn't necessarily mean people have a fake image if their truth of who they are is a little deeper. It just means that it takes more time to get to know someone. Okay. So for him, the sun is actually in the 1st house. His sun is in a different sign than his ascendant. His ascendant is Capricorn. His sun is at 0 degrees Aquarius. So that's a mismatch. Okay. It's very different. The sun at 0 degrees Aquarius is very much, first of all, it's extremely strong at the 0 degree. That would be the most uber powerful Aquarian energy in the whole zodiac. So he was very much aligned with social networking, right? That's what that's all about. It's about his social network, his friends, the people he knew. Okay. That is what Sun in Aquarius is. And this would be a person who almost on a personal level within himself almost would feel like he disappeared if he did not have a big network of people around him. This is the kind of person who would be exceedingly dependent upon having a lot of people and having a lot of approval from various people. And the group in which he looked for approval from was a group that had a very toxic, we should say evil value system. Okay. The value system of this collective group that he fell and got himself into somehow, because I don't think he came from a super powerful family. So he had to find his power through social influence and being a uber, Aquarius, a person with extremely strong Aquarian energy. He would have fallen. That was the group that he chose to align himself with. That was how he found his way to social climb, was through providing what these evil network of people with this dark value system wanted. Okay. And so this is someone who's completely emotionally or psychologically, his whole entire ego structure and identity is dependent upon belonging to this group. Okay. Belonging and being important among the group. Also, the sun in the first house can be an exceedingly, and I mean exceedingly, not, it's not always, not everyone like this. Not everyone with this placement is going to be like this, but it can be an extremely selfish placement. For something like this, we want to find duplicates of that energy in order to be sure that that's what's going on. Like if I was just looking at someone's chart without knowing who they were. In the case of this guy, we know he's, Epstein. We know that Epstein was, his own, what he wanted came above and beyond the well-being, the safety, the anything of anybody else. In fact, it was to the exploitation of the weakest, most vulnerable that he could find. So this guy was beyond selfish, right? This was pathological level of self-aggrandizement and self-gratification. But we can see this selfishness characteristic repeated in the moon in Aries, which is generally a pretty impulsive, reckless, and just a placement that takes action, does what it wants without any restraint, without any stopping its behaviors. So, and then when we look at Jupiter, which usually is wisdom and like the more positive qualities in a person's chart, that it's at the roots of his chart, which is the nadir, which is in Taurus, which tells me something about his mother. Usually planets placed on the nadir or the roots of the chart are placed there by the mother. So it says something about the relationship he had with his mother, which, the mother being Taurus energy, she would have been very concerned about security, well-being, and money. So this would have been an impression he got from her, was that money was very important. That would be values, right? His Venus, I'll talk about that in a second, which that's a whole other thing. So, but that's connected to his nadir, which is the roots of his chart. And because it's Jupiter can be way too nice, way too giving. I feel like his mother was way too indulgent of him, gave him everything, didn't tell him no. He didn't have any limitations or restrictions or anything to prevent him from being super, super impulsive, reckless, and selfish. But hey, let's look at Epstein's face, because his face tells us a lot, actually. First off, the first thing I always get when I look at his face is that the smile on his face, and this isn't the best example. Actually, let me find a better example. So let's look at this. Okay, the way the corners of his mouth turns up, this literally looks like the smile of a crocodile before it eats you. Okay, that's what I think of when I look at this guy's face, is that he has that little corner of his mouth turns up just like a crocodile. I mean, look at this. He just has the smile of a crocodile. And also, in most of the pictures you find of him, his mouth is closed in this kind of, I've got a secret kind of way, like, zipped lip kind of looking on the way he holds his mouth, okay? The way he holds his face. So he definitely has a crocodile smile from what I see looking at him. But also, going back to what I was looking at before, here, this picture, man, it expresses exactly why he looked like respectable. I mean, he looks good in a tuxedo, right? He looks like a classic cartoon character guy in a tuxedo. But the point I wanted to make on this photo is that when you look at the quadrants of a person's face, you can divide a person's face into 3 quadrants. This is the top, right? That's the intellectual, seeking of information. The middle right here would be looking for quality or, value, things that are luxurious. And then the lower quadrant being physical, just the purely physical. And he has got pretty wide forehead, but the largest quadrant on his face is the bottom third. So this is a guy who's very physical. In fact, you see this in quite a few, prominent figures in our social reality. Okay. It's not the only face that has this quality. This could be a person who's just driven by physical drive. Okay. We can see this on the faces of other prominent, famous people, driven by physical, very, very driven by their physical. So those are some thoughts. That's just looking at his face. Okay. But we've got more on the astrology. So in his chart, he has not just a Venus-Mars conjunction in the second house, which is all money, and whatever he values, he gets. Whatever he wants, he gets. Also, the moon in Aries can be an obsession with youth, young people, right? Prepubescent girls or just young. Okay. That's the early part of life. So Mars conjunct Venus, you get what you want. And the asteroid I pointed out in my post on my website about how to spot a PDF file is conjuncting not just Mars, but the Venus-Mars conjunction. So, this asteroid is dark. That's for sure. And it can be the darkest of women. So he gets what he wants. And then he has this horrifyingly awful human woman, maybe not human, but this horrifyingly awful female in his orbit, getting him what he wants, all in Pisces, which can be all that secret, hidden Neptune stuff. And all of this is trining Uranus, which is the social interaction, social network. So he gets whatever he wants through his, networking. This is on the 7th house cusp in Cancer. All right. This is just getting much darker. So the Cancer stuff talks about women, talks about children, talks about babies. Generally, a highlighted prominent Cancer placement in a person's chart does speak to orphans, abandoned children, lost children, anything of that nature. Okay, is adoptions, things like this are almost universally in the charts of people with a prominent Cancer placement, especially the moon. But this is Uranus, so this is connected to the network, something to do with children and babies. We know that he had a scientific breeding program going. Okay, so this is what that is. And it was heavily connected. It was not isolated to him in any way, shape, or form. And he was not even probably the leader of it. He was just the person who was created as the figurehead for the network in order to accomplish and forward the sick and twisted values that existed in that connected group. Okay. So this is not an isolated entity, but of course he started out as an individual, but became a function of the group in which he was a part of. That's what I see when I look at this chart. Also, we know this, right? Okay. So this is not the full depth of a reading like I would do on an individual, but there's a lot of highlighted stuff here that's just right there. Super easy to point out. So also Pluto, which is the most intense driven stuff, is in Leo. So Pluto and Leo, that generation, the weakness, the downside of that generation will be the tendency to be, have large personalities, to obsess about oneself and to be obsessed with your own power. Okay. That's the downside. I'm not saying everyone from the baby boom generation is like this, just that it is a prominent, quality among the worst of that generation. So this Pluto is impacting the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, giving us more power from secrets. Okay. And Pluto in the 7th house is contracts, legalities. Uranus in the 7th house is also contracts, legalities. A lot of stuff he was doing was contractual, but they would have been hidden in secret power alliances. Perfect for an agent of some sort, right? Perfect for that. And then we could talk about Mercury in the 1st house in square to Neptune, that's a person who can lie and deceive and say whatever needs to be said. Mercury also aspecting Neptune. So all three of these planets, and Saturn too. Mercury, it's a little wide to Saturn, but it's more impacting Neptune. This person can just spew words, like just all kinds of words to say whatever word salad will get him the power, the position, hide secret. I mean, this person who just could just blah, 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 whatever keywords, whatever information is going to get him taken seriously because it's in Capricorn. Whatever people will respect, that's what he's going to say. Okay. So he knows exactly. This is definitely somebody who's studied people and knows how to manipulate them. Okay. And then Chiron here on the first, on the cusp of the first house, so on the ascendant, that indicates to me that this is someone who could be taking human life and using it for his own purposes. And in Capricorn, for Saturnian, okay, Saturnian, the Saturnian festivals, the Bacchanalian, Dionysian festivals from ancient Greece and Rome, that, you know, there's the Saturnian, everything looks proper on the surface, but those festivals were wine, women, and song. They were debauchery. They were drunkenness. They were drugged out, you know, Caligula type of events. They were orgies. They were, you know, extreme. Okay. So underneath that Saturn respectability can be all the worst. Okay. That's the thin veneer that allows them to get away with it. That's essentially what that is. And then with Chiron on the first house cusp, this is somebody who's capable of doing like the darkest things to human life, you know, as his calling card. Actually, that was literally his calling card in his social network, in his infrastructure that he belonged to. And the final thing I want to talk about here is his nodes. Okay, the south node and the north node. The north node is the soul's direction of integration, healing, and moving towards your soul mission, your purpose in life. It takes some work to get there because you got to clean up the south node to get to the north node. The north node being your healing, your direction of inspiration, of higher, you know, calling in this lifetime. So his north node is in Aquarius in the first house. So he could have been a positive leader. He could have used his social networking skills, his ability to be very popular for good. But this is not a guy who moved towards his first house Aquarian north node. He was in his south node in Leo. So the south node is always opposite the north node. Here we have the north node they're showing us here in Aquarius, but the south node is the garbage dump of your entire zodiac. Okay. It's like keeping the garbage in your front hallway. It's going to start to stink after a while. So that would be somebody who is involved in contracts, dealing with, legalities, dealing with, because this is the south node in Leo in the seventh house, but all for his own ego. Okay. All for his own ego gratification. That's the low side of Leo. Not all Leos are dark like that, but this one is operating out of the lowest nature. Okay. The lowest nature of ego and self-gratification. Okay. As we have clearly seen, and we could talk about the midheaven in Scorpio, which is all about sex. Sex and power and money. All those things that we've just talked about. So I think you get the idea that the themes that played out in his life show up multiple times on many levels in his astrology chart. Now, there's probably someone else born on that same day who grew up to become a social worker, you know, and helps people and does something completely opposite of the aspects of this guy, right? This Epstein character who was a product of the society, the social group that he connected himself to. This was someone who connected himself to a group that would allow him to rise to a position of power, authority, strength, and that would allow him to gratify all of his carnal, base, lowest desires secretly. They look like one thing on the surface, but behind the scenes, totally different. These are people who wear a fake mask, who show up as something so different than what they actually are that people today are having a really hard time swallowing and understanding and recognizing how diametrically opposed to how they look that these people are. This is a class of people who operates in the world like actors. They're wearing a mask all the time. They are actors. You don't see the real self. And they are good at deception. They're highly, highly deceptive. That is their calling card. So he was a product of a group. He was a product of a network. There's going to be much deeper levels of what was going on that's going to be coming to the surface. As I've been saying on this channel for quite a while, a lot more is coming to the surface about just how dark and sinister this network actually is, okay? And I have looked at Epstein's chart previously for myself. I've never done an examination of it, but he's a very good example. You know, you could look at a chart and you don't necessarily know if someone's going to be like this until you get a connection to the person, right? We know this guy. We know who he is. And the stars impel, they do not compel. That's the line from Shakespeare. You know, we are not our stars. The fault does not lie in our stars. The fault lies in ourselves. But the stars can give us an indication of the temptations, the weaknesses, the choices that a soul is likely to be faced with, and help us to understand if this person's going to, you know, what they're going to be, who they're going to be, and what those karmic choices actually are. So this guy, this Jeffrey Epstein, this creep who's, I don't even, honestly, this is not somebody who's operating out of any level of humanity, whether he was, there's something else working through him, okay? And this is someone who just fell into the darkest of the dark and propelled an agenda that it was the deepest, worst darkness for power, for position, to become a key figure in a network of people who probably already had fame and position and power and money, mostly money and power, in order to exercise in order to just be connected and become important and to feed his ego. That's who he was. That's what he did. And that's why he did it. So this is a person who would do anything, clearly, and did do anything. In fact, got a lot out of being the key person of that network. That was his psychological motivation. Okay. That's what I would like you to take from this, to understand that was what was motivating him. So there are people out there who will say anything, who will make themselves look any way they need to in order to fulfill their own gratification, in order to, especially if they have a super large lower third, not that everybody, a lot of them are athletes, but still, you know, this is somebody who's driven by the physical more than anything else. So, you know, this is what I'm showing you. Hopefully this gives you some insight. I'm not trying to paint everybody who has some of these characteristics with the same brush. I just want you guys to understand these are some indicators you can look for, because we need to understand that there are predators in our midst. And this is how we keep ourselves, our daughters, our sons, our children safe, is by recognizing what we're looking at and knowing that just because someone looks so fabulous, in fact, the more fabulous they look, sometimes the worse they are. I'll tell you a quick story. Years ago, I was doing a lot of readings, and I had a woman call me, and unlike all the tarot readers out here on YouTube, I actually did thousands of readings over the years with actual real clients. But anyway, I had a woman call me for a reading, but I did a reading for her. And I remember in the reading, I said to her, there's a guy in your daughter who was a teenager, social circle. There's some guy, does your daughter go camping? Whoever this is, he's a predator. He's preying on these girls. And her reaction was, oh no, I couldn't ruin her social status. Oh my God, no, I can't get her out of her social circle. I can't ruin that. I was horrified. I wanted to climb through the telephone wire and strangle this woman. It was a phone reading. She wasn't in front of me. If she was, I would have been like, what are you talking about? You know? So why am I telling you this story? Because I want you to understand that that's how it continues. Okay. That people bury it. They act like it's not a big deal when they're literally destroying their own children. Okay. For status, for social climbing. Okay. And this woman did live in a very high-end neighborhood in California. So she was very much about status and social climbing, you know, the Orange County housewives, all that kind of idea. So, oh yeah, so pretty gross. Anyway, that's my take on it. The takeaways here are some ideas of how you can spot these creatures and protect your children. And please, No social status is worth that, ever, for any child, ever, ever, ever. No social group. They might not like being disconnected from a social group short term, but overall, there's nothing worth the torment that is caused to children when they're abused. So that's it. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.